Hello and welcome everybody to the second panel of the conference Europe 1942-45. This is an online discussion organized by the History of World War II subcommittee of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences, the Fulton School of Liberal Arts, the Salisbury University, and the John Wesley Theological College. We are greeting our visitors all over the world, and the organizers kindly ask you to turn off your microphones and cameras during the presentations. We will have 10-minute papers in the section. After each presentation, there will be 15 minutes for discussion. And you can also add the question as comment in the Zoom application. So our first speaker is Ildikó Barna this afternoon. Ildikó is Associate Professor of Sociology at the Eötvös Loránd University, Hungary, where she also serves as head of the Department of Social Research Methodology. She received a PhD in sociology from ELTE in 2009. She was a visiting fellow at the Jack, Joseph and Morton Mandel Center for Advanced Holocaust Studies at the US Holocaust Memorial Museum, where she conducted research on her project concerning Hungarian Jewish Displaced Persons. The title of her presentation is Hungarian Jewish Displaced Persons and Refugees in Italy. So Ildikó, please, the floor is yours.
The Allied armies liberated 6.5 to 7 million displaced persons in Europe outside of their home country. They were liberated camp survivors, slave laborers, and also prisoners of war. The Soviets and the Allies dealt differently with these people who were not in their home country when the war ended. The Soviets repatriated all of them, if necessary, with force, and although the Allies' goal was also initially repatriation, later they provided other options. In the course of the first year after the war, massive repatriation occurred. By July 1945, 4.2 million. By September, more than 6 million were repatriated, leaving the last million who were not willing or not able to go back to their home country owing to psychological, political, or economic reasons. There were approximately 50,000 Jews among them. From 1946, new Jewish refugees began arriving in great numbers from Eastern Europe in Germany, Austria, and Italy, especially from Poland, but also from Hungary. In my presentation, I deal with those Hungarian Jewish Holocaust survivors who were registered in one of the DP camps in Italy. My paper is based on the holdings of the Arolsen, formerly International Tracing Service Digital Archive.
Sorry, Ildikó, your PowerPoint doesn't move.
It doesn't have to move. It doesn't have to move yet.
Oh, sorry.
The topic is an under-researched one from two aspects. There has been no systematic analysis of Hungarian DPs and Jewish and refugees registered by various international organizations after World War II, and especially not based on the holdings of the Arolsen archive. Moreover, there is very limited scholarship on Jewish displaced persons and refugees in Italy, although it is growing extensively, although there is extensive literature already on the Jewish DPs and refugees in Germany. In this presentation, I deal with three research questions. Who were those Hungarian Jewish Holocaust survivors who were registered in one of the DP camps in Italy? How successful was their application? And finally, what was their experience during the proceedings? By the end of 1945, there were 190,000 Jews living in Hungary. The survivors of the Hungarian Holocaust were mostly Jews in Budapest, as the deportation was halted at the beginning of July 1944. On the contrary, provincial Jewry, except those in forced labor, was completely deported between May and July 1944. After the Holocaust, approximately 11,000 Hungarian Jews were liberated from forced labor and 60,000 from concentration camps, mainly by the Soviets. This meant, as mentioned earlier, that most of the Hungarian Jewish survivors were repatriated. However, the vast majority, liberated by the Allies and therefore having a choice, also decided to return to Hungary, at least to search for surviving family members. After the war, the leaders of the Hungarian Jewish community thought that the majority of the Jews would choose to emigrate. However, the final number of those leaving the country was much lower than expected. From 1946 until the establishment of the State of Israel in May 1948, little more than 4,700, while between May 1948 and the end of 1949, approximately 10,300 Hungarian Jews made Aliyah. Additionally, about 10,000 Hungarian Jews found new homes in the United States and Canada, and about 5,000 in Western Europe, Australia, New Zealand, and Latin America. Italy was one of the most important transit countries for Jews wishing to emigrate, especially to Palestine, later Israel. Following the end of World War II, a new wave of Jewish refugees arrived in Italy. They were former concentration camp inmates, but from 1946, also those who decided to emigrate from their original country. Between 1945 and May 1948, an average of 15 to 16,000 Jewish DPs per year arrived in the refugee camps and assembly centers in Italy. It is difficult to give an exact number of Jews hosted as refugees and displaced persons in Italy. According to some sources, between the late summer of 1945 and 1948, a total about 50,000 refugees passed through Italy. After the establishment of Israel, en masse emigration started to the newly founded state. By the end of 1948, only a few thousand Jewish refugees were left in Italy. Concerning the number of displaced persons and refugees receiving care and maintenance, at the end of 1947, Jews made of around 18 out of 22,000 displaced persons, assisted by the preparatory commission of the International Refugee Organization. According to them, at the end of January 1948, 6% of DPs hosted in Italy were Hungarians. The main concern of the organizations providing care and maintenance was to detect the bona fide displaced persons and refugees eligible for international assistance. Therefore, the screening of the DP population was necessary, which according to Cohen was, and I quote, a massive enterprise of individual scrutiny, end of quote. Based on its constitution, the main concern of the International Refugee Organization, the IRO, was to screen out traitors, quislings, and war criminals who were not eligible for any international assistance. However, later, when new refugees were arriving from Eastern Europe, escaping from the emerging communist regimes, officials faced new challenges as the anti-communist criteria started to play an increasing role. As also Cohen wrote, and I quote, the search for unlawful refugees, which had been slapdash and chaotic under UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Rehabilitation Administration, turned into a complex bureaucratic venture when conducted by the civilian personnel of the IRO. Not only there was more than 100-page long manual for the eligibility officers, but IRO also, and I quote, required from its eligibility personnel high moral standards, as well as extensive knowledge of European history, politics, and law, to be able to catch applicants making false statements if this was the case. The burden of proof was solely on the refugees to present documents that supported their claim for IRO assistance. There were problems and discontent on both sides. Displaced persons mistrusted the authorities, feeling that the screening was more a matter of subjective judgment than the objective evaluation of eligibility. While IRO screeners not only faced an extreme workload, but in many cases they felt that the applicants presented fabricated stories. This feeling was reinforced by the fact that the right answers to the questionnaires were circulating among the applicants. When authorities applied the new restrictions to control the flow of refugees, the stories changed accordingly. My presentation is based on subunit 3 of the Arolsen Digital Archive. It comprises registration cards collected by the Supreme Headquarters of Allied Expeditionary Force and its successor organizations, the IRO's assistance sheets, repatriation and emigration lists, DP registration cards, cards about Jewish and non-Jewish children, and most importantly, the care and maintenance files, the so-called CM1 files made by the IRO. In my presentation today, I use the later source. In archival research, contrary to sociological ones, I'm a sociologist by training, data is given and the researchers are not in the position to change them or to use a more suitable measurement tool. This fact significantly limits the possibilities to improve the quality of measurement. Therefore, it is especially crucial to be critical of the sources and take into account the limitations of research deriving from a quality of data under examination. Unfortunately, today, I do not have the time to deal with these limitations in detail. There are 1,554 applicants in my database. These are persons who were registered in one of the DP camps in Italy and applied for eligibility status. It is important to emphasize that due to the structure and the indexation of the database, these applicants declare themselves both Jewish and Hungarian. This means that Orthodox, less assimilated Jews are almost certainly underrepresented. The regional distribution of applications shows that most of the persons were registered in 4 regions of Italy: Lombardy, Apulia, Lazio, and Piedmont. Except for Apulia, Hungarian Jewish applicants were registered in the major cities of the respective regions: in Lombardy in Milan, in Lazio in Rome, in Piedmont in Turin. In Apulia, most registration originates from Trani, while Bari, Santa Maria di Bagno, Lecce, and Santa Cesare Terme were also important centers. The analysis of the temporal distributions of files shows that there were 2 peak years, 1946 and 1949. Approximately one third of the applicants were registered in these 2 years. 16% of the persons were registered in 1947 and 1/10 of them in 1948. There are relatively few cases after 1949 as a result of the closure of the Hungarian borders. This temporal distribution clearly reflects the social and political context in Hungary. In 1946, the Hungarian authorities turned a blind eye to illegal border crossings. From 1947, not only the number of Hungarian Jews who wished to leave the country decreased, but also the attitudes of the authorities toward immigration turned less permissive. In 1949, however, the agreement between the Hungarian and Israeli authorities made possible the aliyah of 3,000 Jews. Therefore, there are 2 things that make it highly possible that those registered in 1949 were to some degree part of the so-called Hungarian exodus. Many of these applicants traveled with collective passports. Moreover, they had relatives in Palestine at a much higher rate than those registered at other times. It is also important to combine the dates and the regions. In the early years, most of the applicants were registered in Lombardy and Piedmont. In 1948, applicants registered in Lazio were overrepresented. Apulia, from where most ships sailed to Palestine, later Israel, was a major destination for emigrating Hungarian Jews in 1949. Nearly 60% of adult applicants were men and 40% women. Nearly 2/3 of the Hungarian Jews registered in Italy were single and 1/3 were married. Over time, the proportion of singles decreased while that of married ones increased. It is interesting to note that a lot of single women left Hungary. At the time of registration, a little less than half of the applicants were between 18 and 29, approximately 1/4 between 30 and 49, and a little less than 10% over 50 years of age. As there were considerably more families registering in 1949, the proportion of children under 18 was much higher. As expected, more than 3/4 of the applicants primarily wanted to go to Palestine, and almost all of them only to Palestine, later Israel. There are several case files from 1949 where the applicants said that although they did not want to go to Palestine, they were aware that the Jewish transport, the so-called Jewish transport organized by Barna, was the only way to leave the country. The reason for emigrating also changed considerably over time. While in 1946, 46% of the respondents said that they wanted to leave Hungary because none of their relatives were alive, in 1949, only 9% said the same. Being a Zionist was the reason for 8% in 1946, while 50% in 1949. At the same time, in 1949, almost half of the applicants mentioned the political situation or communism in Hungary. In accordance with the fact that many of the applicants in 1949 had relatives in Palestine, 17% mentioned family unification as the reason for emigration. Unfortunately, we cannot know if these justifications reflect the real intention of the respondents or were just the byproduct of the flows of the eligibility procedure described above. However, it is striking that different families used very similar wording in their justification they provided, suggesting that they either learned what to say to have a higher chance of being considered eligible, or the officers used the same wording irrespective of what the applicants actually said. Only 15% of the applicants were found eligible for the refugee status. However, it is important to note that 37% of the applicants left the country without permission, and in the case of 30% of the applicants, we do not have any information about their status. In this respect, there are large differences between those registered in different years. In 1946, 83, and in 1947, 61% of the applicants left the camp without permission. In 1948, the proportion of those found eligible greatly increased. In this year, 39% of the applicants were found eligible, while the other proportion, as mentioned earlier, was only 15%. In 1949, those found eligible were overrepresented. There are also marked regional differences in the percentage of applicants found eligible. While in Lazio, a little more than 1/3, and in Lombardy, a little more than 1/5 of the applicants were found eligible, in Apulia, their proportion was only 7%. In the last part of my presentation, I would like to shortly present a case to show the complexities of the eligibility procedure. I'm sorry, I forgot to change here. So this is the slide about the eligibility which I described. Onno Elek Lukács née Steiner was born in 1925 in Budapest. According to her account, before the war, she lived with her parents, but in 1939, her father died. According to her CM1 file, after the German occupation of Hungary on March 19, 1944, she went into hiding and survived the Holocaust with false papers. After the liberation, she continued living with her mother and worked in a shop until June 1948, when she married István Elek. It is not directly indicated, but it is suspected that her husband was not Jewish. Soon after their marriage, the couple decided to leave Hungary, as they both disliked the regime, as they said. One of the friends of Anna's husband, István, was arrested by the communists, and István had to leave Hungary immediately for Austria to avoid arrest. And they got separated, as Anna was not yet prepared for leaving. In August,
1 minute, sorry.
I'm sorry?
1 minute.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
In August 1949, Anta went illegally to Bratislava, Czechoslovakia, with the help of a private smuggler who promised to take her to Vienna to meet her husband, but the smuggler disappeared. Although Anna tried other ways to get to Austria, she did not succeed, and with many other Hungarians arrived in the transit camp of Trani on the 9th of September, 1949. On the 15th of October, she got the stamp which most Hungarians got in Trani from the eligibility officer, J.F. Snoek. This is on the slide. not within the mandate of IRO, with the handwritten note next to it, not a refugees nor a DP. However, unlike other CM1 files of Hungarian Jews from this camp, there is a handwritten word in red, void. The detailed analysis of her file makes it clear how eventful these days were. The file tells us that the IRO in Rome re-interviewed Anna. Fortunately, the eligibility officer typed down her story in detail, meaning that her journey through the maze of administration is visible. She left Trani before notification of her eligibility status and was registered and re-interviewed by the review office of the Rome Intake Center. Anna's interview in Rome shows that Anna was Jewish, as she stated in Trani. However, later in Rome, she lied about her origin and said that she was a Roman Catholic because, and I quote her words, she heard that the Hungarian interviewer was anti-Semitic, as she later confessed in her second interview in Rome. Here we see a textbook case of an applicant changing her story to meet the expectation she assumed. In the interview in Rome, Anna said that she left Trani because she thought that the extremely short interview there was only for the registration in the camp and not for emigration. As the eligibility officer recorded her words, and I quote, she, the applicant, states that the whole registration in Trani was a quick matter, only very few questions were put to her. So, end of quote. So she did not know this was the real IRO registration for emigration. What makes this statement more interesting is the note of the officers in brackets. And I quote, looking the applicant's questionnaire in Trani, I can't but accept this reason, end of quote. Namely that Anna left Trani and re-registered in Rome thinking that Trani was not a real IRO registration for emigration. We had to add that looking at the CM1 files of other Hungarians in Trani, and especially comparing them to those other DP camps, the same negligence appears as the filling out of almost all the CM1 files from Trani are highly incomplete. Finally, on the 14th of October, 1949, she was found eligible for IRO assistance, and she was informed in a letter on 18th October, 1949. Unfortunately, there are no other documents that could shed light on whether she could be reunited with her husband and leave Europe for Canada or Australia, which is where they wanted to go. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Ildikó, for your really interesting presentation on this the research topic. And we've got 15 or 10 more minutes to discuss this topic. So if you've got any questions, then please don't hesitate to, so please don't hesitate to ask if you've got any questions. Anybody?
I have a question.
Yeah, please.
Thank you very much for this very interesting, very informative presentation. I would like to mention that in Germany, in the German DP camps, just after the war, the Jewish DPs were living under armed guards practically in prisoners of war camps, and they lived together with other national groups. However, the Jews belonged to a victim group of the Nazi regime, but they were together with other national groups. And after the Harrison report, which was made in August 1945, the situation changed, because then the British and the American government recognized the Jewish DPs as a special group. And later, they had opportunity to leave these camps, and they moved to houses, private houses, and their food ration was also increased. So that was the situation in Germany. And I wonder what happened in Italy, whether in Italian DP camps, were they separated with other DPs, and what was their living condition in Italy? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. I just would like to add that even after the Harrison report, there was a huge difference between the British and the American zone. So that was one of the reasons why Hungarian Jews mainly wanted to leave for the American zone and not the British, besides other reasons. So in Italy, there were a lot of also a lot of private houses that they used. And I think it also changed over time their situation in Italy, but in Italy the social environment was very much different than from Germany, because in Germany most of the DP camps were established either in former concentration camps, which was not the case in Italy, or in facilities used before by the Nazis, which was also not the case in Italy, so or not in that amount. So practically from this reason, there was a very big difference, and also the social environment was very different in Italy. First of all, the Italian authorities wanted to separate themselves from the Nazi past, so it was very different, and also the society was less permitted by anti-Semitism in Italy than in Germany.